Story 1. So this is not my story, but a co-worker's experience. Carl is my co-worker. I have worked with him for about 11 years now. He is an electrical engineer by trade and a normal dude. Wife, 2 kids, yada yada. No signs of any conspiracy theories or any weirdness. He is in his mid-40s. Anyway, long story somewhat short, Carl is 10,000% convinced he was abducted by aliens when he was a young boy. It started when he was 7. His family lived in Arizona in a suburb of Phoenix, whose name is escaping me at the moment. He said he always knew when they were coming that night. He would have a hard time falling asleep. Then he said he would fall quickly unconscious, similar to surgical anesthesia, and wake up in a strange room. His description of the room was like a stainless steel mixing bowl. Everything seemed to have a glowing satin steel finish. His eyes would always be blurry at first and feel like there was mucus in them. And he could see, he noticed he was on a table, and while there were no restraints, he couldn't move. Not because something was holding him back, he said, "It felt like moving was a foreign idea. My body simply didn't compute that it needed to move." He said he was completely calm. He would see beings moving about the room in a blurred distance. But the first meeting ended just like that. He never saw them up close. He fell back asleep and woke up in his room. This was a thing that he says happened several times. The second and subsequent times were more and more vivid, as he was able to see them up close and seemed to stay awake more. His description of the beings is very similar to what it seems like most others describe them as. Short, long fingers, large oval head with big eyes, small eyes and mouth. He heard no talking between them, but he was able to communicate with them. He says the communication was sort of like the way his wife and he communicates. They know what the other means with a simply silent look. He just sort of knew what they needed. After a few trips, as he calls them, there was the feeling that they knew him, and he knew them. He felt confident that it was the same beings doing this every time. He said they seemed naked, but he didn't see any genitalia. The eyes were clearly covered by some sort of lens. Anyway, this went on. He said he was never scared. He told his mom, but she chalked it up to an imaginary friend. So blah, 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 skipping over parts. It stops suddenly when he is 14. On his last ride, it was made clear his study was finished. He doesn't know why, but assumes something to do with puberty. He also believes that they are removing human DNA and using it for something. So I'm like, bullshit. Even though this sort of story is very out of character for him, he simply doesn't joke around or play games. I didn't believe him. The next day he brought his doctor info in, pages and pages of medical shit, and a little vial. In the vial was a small, 3-pronged jack-looking thing. He stated they found this when he had an unrelated MRI. It was in his collarbone area. It produced an electromagnetic field. It was removed and he keeps in a jar. Story 2. In the past few months, my family was looking for a new house in the countryside of New Sheepland. A real estate agent, which we will call Kate, was introducing us properties around the area. One Friday night, she phoned my mom saying, "There is this property that's suitable for you guys. You guys should come check it out." My mother asked, "What's the property like and what's happening with it right now?" Kate said that the property has been cleared out for about a year now. The next day, we drove out to the property, which at that time was about an hour's worth of driving. We got there about 5 minutes before Kate. We sat in the car for 5 minutes and immediately I told my father, "I don't like the feeling of this place." To put things in context, the house is covered by a fence well more like a wall, a thick, wide wall about 2 meters high. Kate arrived in her car and we walked out to greet each other. We had to hop over the gate from the neighbor's side to get into the property. As I hopped in first, I noticed there was a shed and there was an unpleasant feeling about the shed. I walked into the shed and felt coldness down to my bones. I could tell something about the place was not right. We walked into the house and the house was a total mess. Everything was just disgusting. Walls were cracked, leaking ceilings, dirty bathroom, and torn up carpets. Anyways, moving on. Kate took our family into the master bedroom and she started talking about how with a bit of work done, this could turn out to be a good house. I started to get bored after 20 seconds of her speech and went to explore the house. I went to the bathroom first and there was nothing wrong with it. Expect it was really dirty. I keep moving towards the kitchen, like area nothing much to see. Moved towards the living area, and it was dark, and I felt coldness in my heart. There was 2 more bedrooms, and I went inside them, one on the right and on the left. I went into the right one first, and it was pretty bad. I felt like as if someone is watching me and following really close to me. The other room was even worse. There was no windows and everything was just not right. My parents came out of the master bedroom with Kate 2 minutes after, and I said to my mom in Chinese, "Mom, this place does not feel right. It feels haunted." My mom also told me in Chinese that she felt exactly the same. The agent Kate saw our facial expressions and I said to her, "Why don't we take a look outside?" With a smile on my face, and she just looked at me for about 3 seconds with no facial expressions and said, "Okay, let's." We went into the garden and Kate went to talk to my mom about the fruit trees and whatnot, and my dad and I went to check out the dog house. The property owner was a dog breeder, so there was commercial dog kennels. Talking to my dad, I said, "This house does not feel right, especially that room in the shed." I said to my dad, "I feel as if someone got slaughtered in this house." Dad and I walk up to Kate and my mom, and Kate frowned and sighed and said, "Okay, guys, I can't hold it in, and it seems like you guys feel suspicious about this place. To be honest with you, the previous owner's wife hung herself in the shed, and after 6 months, the rest of the family could not stand living here anymore and moved out. Sorry, guys." We did not say much after this, and we just drove off. The drive back home was pretty silent, and we were just saying how scary it is. Truth is, that moment I walked into the shed, I felt a really strong presence upon me like a heavy weight on my shoulders. That night, I had a nightmare, one so realistic you thought it was real. Zrania, I was not afraid of this whole thing's about her hanging herself. I was really shocked. That's all that cold feeling. I've never quite felt anything like it. In my nightmare, all I could see was a pale lady with long black hair dressed in white, and I could not really see her face, kind of like Slender Man. She was everywhere and sky was black, and suddenly from a grass patch into a shed, and you just see a person there hanging. Story 3. My experiences began, as far as I can tell, when I was 8 years old. There was a part of my room, a dark closet with no door, abnormally dark, like pitch black, so you couldn't see anything inside of it if the light was off, even with a nightlight or moonlight illuminating the rest of the room. The closet had curtains only, which ended about 1/3 of the way down the closet. I was always so terrified of that closet, but nothing bad happened for years. Like I said, the first real happening was when I was 8. That night I was trying to sleep and couldn't do it. I just felt kind of almost like a light panicky feeling, a fluttering of sorts mixed with anxiety. I ducked completely under the covers and just curled up, trying to sleep so the morning would come. Suddenly, right after I turned over, sort of suddenly, I feel a harsh tugging on my leg. I try and pull my leg back and curl up tighter in my covers. I had no clue what was going on and was freaking the heck out. A second or two later, I was pulled completely off the bed and dragged into the closet by something I could not see at all. But I could definitely feel it. It had long fingers ending in claws. There were marks on my leg when I saw it later. It was strong. My blanket was left trailing from the bed I had been pulled from, but I was in the closet. Everything was black. I couldn't move for what felt like at least an hour, and when I could move, all I could do was tug the covers around me. I felt very sick. In the morning, I was still sitting there, but finally a little bit of light got in and I could move. That was the only happening I remember at that house. We moved soon after due to unrelated reasons, but a few years later I started seeing shadows, humanoid shadows, crawling on the walls. I would hear whispers in an unintelligible language. This started around age 12, in distant-sounding screams, starting around age 14 to 15. But all that was just the beginning. Once I started dating, it all pretty much stopped. I didn't see or hear much more. At least nothing very concerning, music box noises and flowing water on occasion during that time. Weird, but not all that concerning. But after I left for college at age 18 and left that boyfriend, everything kind of came back in full force. But now I can see so much more of it. If I walk outside at night, I can see shadowy figures, much clearer than before. I can even see their eyes, but they don't seem human. I also see disembodied limbs, mostly arms or tongues in all black, coming out of walls. I also see eyes peering out from areas of darkness on occasion, or black stuff suddenly appearing on walls looking kind of like oil, sometimes dripping down like blood. The whispers are a lot closer sounding. I don't hear many of the screams anymore. Starting about half a year ago, I felt something wrong about certain places in my apartment. At one point, I was about to fall asleep when I saw long black fingers ending in claws, kind of moving out from the crack in the side of my closet door. The fingers kind of tapped on the outside of the closet and opened it just a tiny bit, but nothing else came of that. I heard the sound of metal-like nails scraping on wood. I feel the same aura from the more recent thing as I did when I was 8 and first started feeling, seeing, hearing this stuff. Granted, my doctor said I show signs of paranoid schizophrenia. He would not do tests for some reason, but this is what he suspects, and I've pretty much accepted that. It's a much simpler explanation than, "Oh right, so you've got a demon." Story 4. I grew up in an old house. My parents still live in it. It's about 150 years old or so. When I was about 8, I swear I experienced interaction with a spirit. I was sitting on my bed playing with my stuffed Simba when my lace curtain moved. It didn't sway in the breeze. My window was shut and the air conditioning was off. Half of it filled out, resembling a full 1800s-style skirt. It only filled out half of the curtain, rounding out and then abruptly laying against the window. I heard a young girl's voice. Being a child, I wasn't scared, I was just curious. It asked my name, and when I answered, it told me its name and age. Elizabeth. She was 9. She had a long, pretty dress with lace and hair that curled like Shirley Temple's, but went to her waist. She had this large white bow in her hair. I talked to Elizabeth for a few years. I'd ask her questions about where she's from. Did she have siblings? What's her favorite thing to do? When I was upset, she would sometimes appear and the edge of my curtain would brush lightly against my face, as if a hand brushing away tears. I never told anyone about her when I was young, because I was afraid I'd get teased. When I was just shy of being 12, she came to me one day. She didn't talk, just appeared in my curtain. I asked if she was okay, and she replied she was cold and lonely. Right then, my curtain filled fully, and a new voice named Sarah came, saying she had to take Elizabeth away. It was the last time I ever heard from Elizabeth again. At 20, when I go home and can't sleep at night, I call out her name softly and wait for my curtain to come sweeping out like before, but it never does. I know it sounds like an imaginary friend, but imagination can't control how a fabric moves. Imagination can't create names and fashions that are common in a century I didn't even know about. Another less nostalgic episode happened about 3 years ago. Me and a friend had snuck out to see a boy. We met him in his car and listened to music for a few minutes. He was cute, but a stranger. Maybe had said 5 words to the guy before. My friend and him start kissing and doing things while I sit uncomfortably next to them. I get out of the car and run back to her house in the pouring rain. When I get to her room, I throw most of my wet clothes off and sit on her sister's bed in the dark. At first I was pissed. She's go at it with a guy I thought was cute. Then I panicked, realizing that neither of us knew him well. He'd done crazy jail time-worthy things, and my best friend was in his car alone. I couldn't breathe and put my knees to my chest, trying to get air slowly. I started to hear this shrill, inhuman chattering sound and looked around. My friend's bed was pushed into a corner, and on the wall there was a black figure. It had spindly arms and legs, and a body that hunched at an extreme angle. Its fingers were long, with an extra joint. It loomed over her bed, bending almost halfway over it. She came into the room, throwing light on the wall, and it vanished. She saw me with my hands over my ears, trying to keep the sound out, hyperventilating, staring at her wall. I didn't sleep all night, just staring at her wall, making sure it didn't come back for her. Along with those 2 distinct memories, I hear things all the time. Footsteps in an empty house, whispers, noises that are too strange to be animals or wind. I get chills when I walk into certain rooms of my parents' house. Sometimes when I'm walking home alone at night, the wind will blow leaves towards me from behind, and I'll hear a soft shouting that sounds like cursing or a foreign language. I often see shapes shifting or figures moving in my peripheral, but when I turn to see clearly, it vanishes. Story 5. I have been seeing things since I was 5. I'm 33 now. If I count everyone, it'll be probably over several dozens. Sometimes are just mild things, like seeing a man in a crowd, lacking any color and wearing clothes from at least a century ago. Other times are more disturbing. For example, this happened to me about 15 years ago. I meet a cute girl on a RPG reunion, connected instantly, and after the reunion was over, I offered to escort her to her home. We arrived to her home. She invites me for coffee, as her parents are sleeping already upstairs. We chat a good while, then we start to make out. We were on a couch on her living room. I look behind her, and there is a guy sitting on a chair by the dining table. Not more than 12 feet away from us, he looked like 60 years old, wearing out-of-date clothes, brown pants, military-style sweater, something very common in the 60s, 70s here, but not unheard of today either. He was just sitting there watching us. I knew that her parents were overprotective, so my first thought was, shit, busted by her father. I whisper that her father was behind her. She turns around, looks in the general direction where the guy was and tells me, there is no one there. I'm still seeing the guy sitting there, and while I'm getting a creepy feeling from the beginning, I start to believe that I'm getting pranked or something like that. So I insist that there is someone there, but this time I'm getting a little irritated. She turns around again, starts looking around, and asks me where. I tell her right there on that chair. I'm still seeing him at this time. Now she looks intrigued and asks me how is he dressed like. As soon as I describe the clothes, she yells, "Mom!" and scares the shit out of me. Now I'm not seeing him anymore. But now I'm seeing her ex-military dad and her school teacher mom rush downstairs on their underwear, thinking that I'm taking advantage of her daughter. After stopping her dad from gutting me alive, she asked me to tell her mom what I saw. When I'm halfway, her mother stops me and finishes the description, including details I didn't give before, like the shoes. Turns out that the mother, another daughter, and her brother have seen that guy every other day for years, just sitting on different places of the house watching them, even following them with his eyes and head when they move around the room. Her mom was very sensitive also, like me, and had dozens of similar experiences. I have talked a lot with her over the years. Story 6. My mother, my aunt, my uncle, my grandmother, and her husband have all had experiences in one of their old houses, along with several friends of the family. Each of them has a story to tell me, and none of them doubt anything about it. Their old house was supposedly haunted. Doors would randomly slam. My aunt told me that she would hear footsteps coming down the hallway and towards her bedroom, only to stop at her door. My mother, who was pregnant with me, was using the bathroom in the middle of the night. Someone knocked at the door and she replied that it was occupied. They kept knocking and my mother was getting pissed, telling them to go away. Only her grandmother and grandfather were home at the time and were both in bed. When she opened the door after finishing up, there was no one there. My uncle told me he heard voices whispering to him at night. All of them at one point has heard the bureau in the attic being moved around, the loud scrape of the legs moving across the wood floor. My grandmother's husband didn't believe these stories. He was a hard military guy, didn't take shit. One day, everyone in the house had gone out. He was downstairs watching TV. He hears the sound of the bureau being pushed or dragged along the floor of the attic. "Who the hell's up there? Knock that off!" he shouts, thinking it was my mother or her siblings messing around or something. He hears it again, goes upstairs to tell them off, and realizes that no one else is in the house. He told me that he got right the hell out of there and didn't come back until my grandmother came back home. This story takes place in a different house. My grandmother's brother was an alcoholic. One day he was walking home drunk from the bar and fell off a bridge. He had taken out a life insurance policy only a few weeks prior, so the family didn't think it was an accident. The funeral happens a few days later, and the funeral procession happens to pass by the house they lived, as it was located on a major road in the town. As they pass by, their house is on fire. Flames are billowing out of one room, her brother's old room. They halted the procession to get out and call the fire department. After everything was put out, they found that there was no fire damage in his room. None of his belongings were burned. The carpet was intact. There were no black marks along the walls, no peeled paint, nothing. It looked like nothing at all had happened in that room, even though they had seen flames billowing out of the windows just minutes before. They later used the money from my great-uncle's life insurance to buy the haunted house they would later live in. There are many, many stories that they've all told me. Too many to recount. I'm an extremely skeptical person. I don't believe in ghosts or the supernatural, but when every person in my family has stories to tell about it, I can't call them liars. I don't believe they are lying. I can't believe it's true, but I know for a fact that they aren't lying. Story 7, I was about 13, 14, or 15. I don't remember exactly, and my memory is starting to let it go since I spend so little time thinking about it. What I do remember is waking up to just generally a bunch of damn noise in the house. I had recently moved my room from the basement up to the main floor at the end of the house, on the same floor as the living room, kitchen, entertainment room, a bathroom, dining room, and study. The rest of the bedroom were in a remodeled basement where my younger brother and mom sleep. The noises that woke me up included stomping around in the hallway outside my room, going into the bathroom, turning the taps on full blast, turning the taps back off, opening and closing drawers, taps on and off, going to the kitchen, opening, closing cupboards, back and forth. It was an alarming amount of noise, and I would have assumed it was a person in the house. My bedroom door was wide open, however, the hallway is perpendicular to my room, so all I could see was the wall at the end of the hallway on the other side of a bead curtain, which I was staring at intently. Something stopped in front of the doorway to my room and stared in. I wasn't sure if it could see me or not. It would have easily been able to see that it was a bedroom, but I was absolutely not moving in the bed, so I don't know if it recognized there was a person in the room. It stood there longer than it should have, as though it had complete confidence that it had every reason in the world to be there, staring either at me or at least into my room. I think it touched the bead curtain barely, but not enough to cause it to move. Then it stomped away. It didn't leave the house. It didn't open a door or anything. The noise just stopped. Shortly afterward, my cat showed up and she was scared as shit, completely ignoring the three of us who were all now very wide awake with the police on the way. The cat had a full arch in her back, sniffing the walls with extreme intent, not making eye contact with any of us. I have never seen a cat look so spooked as my cat on that night. All of the doors were locked, windows were locked, no signs of anyone having been in the house at all. While we were talking to the police, the cat was still methodically sniffing around, wide-eyed tail in the airback, arched hair on end. The police officer could tell we were very shaken up, and when he looked at the cat, even he looked a little bit concerned. But there was nothing he could do. They searched the whole house for us. He told us that if anything like this happens again, to give them a call. Story 8, I saw a live exorcism. I was skeptical as hell and thought, okay, this is obviously some sort of psychological thing. It was my friend's little sister, and basically she had changed a lot in the previous weeks, like drastically. My friend told me everything that was going on, and we went to his house. His family and I are generally quite close, so they were cool with some of the questions I asked. Her behavior had apparently become scarily aggressive and rebellious. She had started drinking, which was a huge deal for their culture, and apparently was spending late night with boys. Another huge deal. She was 16 at the time. I knew that all she really needed was some therapy, but they were convinced she was possessed. I was young and terrified of my friend's parents, so I was too scared to object. Anyway, a bearded man walks in and speaks to them in their language. I'm simply rolling my eyes, unable to believe this is actually happening in the 21st century. He asked a few questions and then asked where she was. The parents replied the bedroom. Her parents walked and stood outside her door, and her father knocked. I was peeking at the staircase. She had headphones in, so she didn't hear. He banged on her door a little more, and then she started to bang the door in the same rhythm on the other side. Her dad stopped. She opened the door, looked at them, giggled, then calmed down and walked to the living room. We're standing there. Me, the bearded man, my friend, her brother, her other brother, and two of her cousins. The bearded man said something, and her father basically grabbed her from behind. She started to scream, like really, really scream, but everyone in her family just told her to calm down, that it's okay. Her father, while restraining her, brought her towards the bearded man, where she is still screaming, and her arms are kind of flailing about. The father pins her down, and she really started to lose it. I'm absolutely scared here. I'm almost about to intervene, but I'm again scared shitless and curious at the same time. The bearded man started singing some prayers and the girl began to scream as if it hurt her. This goes on for a while until I honestly couldn't take it anymore. This girl was sick and she needed help, not ramblings of yet another crazy person being sang down her ears. I looked to my friend and tell him to stop this, but he had the calmest expression in the world on his face. Here, his sister is being abused in front of his very eyes and he's just so chilled that I honestly felt like I didn't even know him. I go to the mother, who looked really emotional, but even she insisted that I absolutely should not interfere. I was still going to. But then, something insane happened, and it still kind of scares me to this day. The possessed girl speaks, but not in a language she knew. She speaks a language that she knows how to read, but doesn't understand a word of. The same language the bearded man was singing in, and she spoke it fluently. They have a conversation. The bearded man and the possessed girl, the whole family, even the father who still has her pinned, but far more gently now, are left clueless as to what's going on. I go to my friend and ask him what they're saying, but he didn't know. I asked why not. He told me it wasn't his language, it was Arabic. He didn't know Arabic and neither did anyone in his family, especially his younger sister who could barely even read it. Component placement. They were obligated by their religion to be able to read Arabic. The exorcist and the demon speak for a while until again he started to sing and she began to scream. I'm frozen to the spot now. I have no idea what the hell is going on and no idea what to do. He stopped singing and started whispering gently in her ear. She stopped screaming. He gets her to repeat a few prayers and she seemed normal again. He asked her father to let her hands go and she sat up. Her mother immediately goes in to hug her and her father and everyone seem relieved. I am honestly shocked and just mind blown. I'm standing there watching a girl who was apparently recently possessed, surrounded by her loving family. After that, she was fine. She wasn't drinking, she wasn't dating. I spoke to her far more often and she seemed normal. She actually claims to not remember most of the exorcism. I quizzed her about it, but nothing. Just the end when he started whispering in her ear. Still think about to this day, possessed by a demon or some crazy mental disorder which has you speaking a language fluently, a language you don't even understand. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.